Hey transformative leaders and trauma survivors, it's Ophelia Lockwoodbury of thehappymedium.com. If you've ever wondered how trauma affects the brain, and if the Bible even speaks to issues such as trauma and how it may be healed, you certainly want to watch this video. Welcome back everybody, and if you're new here, thank you for joining me today. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so that you'll never miss a new video when I upload every Wednesday. So how does trauma affect the brain? And does the Bible have anything relevant to say about trauma and how potentially it can be healed? Well, first of all, let's define what trauma is. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines trauma this way. It is an event or a series of events experienced by the person, or it can be also experienced by a group or a family, as physically or psychologically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. Some of the manifestations of that trauma can be things like flashbacks, intrusive memories, thoughts, or images. Avoidance symptoms like trying to cope, doing everything at all costs to avoid reminders of that trauma. You can see things like terror, horror, disconnection, dissociation, even incongruent emotional reactions such as uncontrollable laughing that is inappropriate for the situation. But one thing to remember about trauma is that it is highly subjective, highly personal. So something that may be traumatic for you may not be traumatic for me, and vice versa. Another thing to remember about trauma is that it doesn't always result in PTSD. A lot of people think that trauma and PTSD are the same things, but they are not. Trauma is sort of this whole experience that anybody can go through. But after a while, the expectation is that people will, the sympathetic system will cool off on its own, and people will go back to a normal functioning. It's sort of this working your way through it. You've been through the trauma, and then you just kind of move ahead, where you're still in the present. You're not stuck in the past. People with PTSD don't necessarily do that, but that's another video for a different day. But I do want to say that trauma can result in many manifestations. PTSD can be one of them, but depression can be another. Anxiety, panic attacks, relationship problems. So trauma can cause different reactions based on the person. So how does trauma affect the brain? Well, I like to explain the brain as a three-part brain. So the lizard, gizzard, and wizard. Now I know most of you have probably heard of lizard-wizard brain, but bear with me with my explanation of gizzard, because I think it makes sense to me. It really helps me to solidify the functions of the brain, the understanding of the brain. So obviously the lizard part of the brain is the most primitive part of the brain that we call the reptilian part of the brain. And this is basically, it helps us to maintain, this part of the brain helps us to maintain our basic bodily functions, such as, the oxygen that keeps us breathing, that keeps our heart beating, those kinds of things. The gizzard part of the brain, now, if you understand what a gizzard is the part of a bird's stomach that provides sort of this extra protection against, the bird eating the wrong things or things getting stuck in its system and the bird potentially getting sick and dying. So that gizzard is the sort of that protective, that harder layer of the stomach. And I liken this to the limbic system, where it contains the amygdala and the hippocampus. Where the amygdala essentially sort of takes over and in sense of a perceived threat, takes over even the functions of the hippocampus. And so when the amygdala senses a threat, it starts to pump out this cortisol to decrease the level of pain, or that threat experience. And when it does, the body goes into survival mode. So a person, depending on the person, they can go into fight, flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. And when they're in that mode, everything else sort of goes offline. Even some of the functions of the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus allows, it stores the declarative knowledge, and it allows a person to answer questions such as, where were you? What happened? What was it like? What did you see? And a person, especially if a person is in freeze mode, they're going to be like, I don't know. And certainly that person is not going to be able to engage in high-level thinking or problem solving or logic or planning, or those kinds of things where the wizard brain is most effective and operates. So, does the Bible offer any relevant and meaningful insight into the experience of trauma, into trauma, and how to heal it? Well, first of all, let me say that the Jewish and the Christian scriptures arose out of traumatic experiences. They speak to catastrophic human trauma, from the holy wars in the Old Testament to the horrors of murder and persecution in the New Testament, with our number one example being the trauma of the cross with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But the Bible also tells us that we were intentionally made, our bodies, the way that it functioned, it was made for a particular reason or a specific purpose. The psalmist says in 139, Psalm 139 and 13, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I was formed in the depths of the earth. You saw my unformed body, even from the foundations of the earth. And then you intentionally knit me together. So that sounds like we were made for a purpose. Our bodies were intended to function in a particular way. But the Bible also provides stories of trauma-causing lamenting. Stories of Jesus and Jeremiah and David and Job crying out in anguish because they thought God had forsaken them as they endured the most horrific and dark times of suffering from trauma. Jesus' trauma, particularly when we look at Luke 22:44, it says that Jesus' anguish was so great that his sweat was like drops of blood on the ground. If that's not trauma, I don't know what it is. So if the Bible indeed has something to say about trauma, and if it can describe instances of trauma, various instances in the biblical text, then does it have any insight into how to heal trauma? I believe that it does, and I think it works hand in hand with the core principles of a trauma-informed approach. And so what I'm going to share with you is based on the core principles of the trauma-informed approach. The principles of safety and trust and support, collaboration, empowerment, and humility. The Bible does speak to safety, spiritual safety, and particularly in the book of Proverbs 18 and 10, I believe, when it says the name of the Lord, Emmanuel, God with us. That name is a fortified tower, and the righteous run into it and they are safe. So spiritual safety comes by trusting and believing in the name of our Father, Jesus Christ. And so when we know that He is one, He dwells in us, His Spirit dwells in us, we're one in whom Christ dwells. We know that God is with us. We know that spiritually we are safe. And then we can combine those, even psychologically and emotionally too, that spiritual safety can have a psychological and emotional impact on us. And then we can combine that with the trauma-informed approach of physical and environmental safety. And then trust. Now, when we talk about trust in the trauma-informed approach, we talk a lot about, in terms of transparency, decision-making, but the Bible in Ephesians 4:25 also tells us to put off falsehood and speak truthfully with our neighbor. And so this is, again, in a spiritual sense, but it also applies to relational uh, interactions. So in order to build relationships and maintain a bond and trust amongst each other, we do need to make sure that we are telling the truth and that we are not incorporating things that are untrue or just straight up lies into our interactions and conversations with other people. And then when we're also talking about support, support is crucial in terms of shared experience, so that other people can see that they are not alone, that someone else understands their situation, the things that they're going through, the trauma that they have experienced. The Bible also speaks to this in Galatians 6:2, where it says, "Carry one another's burdens." This is how we fulfill the law of Christ. We fulfill the law of Christ by letting people know not just that we're walking along with them, but that they are not alone. That shared experience that we all go through similar experiences. We're all traumatized at some point. Trauma doesn't necessarily, as I said earlier, mean that you get a diagnosis of PTSD. It just means that at some point in time, we're all susceptible to it. And then the next principle of collaboration. In the trauma-informed approach, collaboration in terms of interaction in organizations typically relates to power differences, or equalizing that power differential, so that people won't feel that they are beneath you, or that typically there's a CEO and there's these sort of this trickle down effect, and people might not feel that they can approach certain people. But in terms of collaboration, that is minimized or even taken out of the equation altogether. In the book of Ecclesiastes, tells us that Ecclesiastes 4:9-10 tells us that two are better than one. If one falls, then the other can come along and pick him up. And that type of collaboration means that we are looking out for one another, not necessarily in the sense that if something benefits me, then I'll look out for you. But it's more of this egalitarian, collaborative approach where everybody is sort of on equal footing, and that's basically the way that interaction goes. And then empowerment is another core principle of the trauma-informed approach, where strengths are recognized, abilities are validated, contributions are appreciated. And in the Bible, Romans 15:1-2 says that we should believe in resilience, bear one another's burdens, help people get to a place where they are back on their feet. But we should do this not to please ourselves. Each of us should please our neighbors for their good, to build them up. And that's what empowerment is. It's, looking at other people's contributions and their strengths, and really letting them know that you support those, and that they're seen, and that they're heard and understood, and that you believe in resilience, and that you want them to succeed. That is the essence of what empowerment is. And then humility. This is a big one. Especially, I don't get into politics too much publicly, but I do have a strong opinion about certain things that are in the political circles. But humility to the issues that are out there and responding to those issues, in terms of biases and stereotypes, historical traumas, cultural things that are going on where people have been marginalized for such a long time. And the book of Philippians says something very interesting about being humble. It says, Philippians 2:3-5 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition, but in humility." Listen to this. "Value others above yourselves, not looking at your own interest, but to the interests of others." So when a particularly marginalized group is talking about their struggle and their traumas, and then another group comes and tries to insert themselves into the conversation, especially if you're Christian. Now, We expect the world to be the world. We expect unbelievers to be unbelievers. But if you are particularly a Christian and you say that you believe in God's word and that it is a guidebook for your life, primarily the guidebook, the lens through which you see your life and how you live your life, then why are we not following scripture here? Or are we just cherry picking? Like I said, I don't want to get too much into that. But yeah, we should in humility allow people to speak their truth, their experience, and we should humbly listen and acknowledge that. So now you know about trauma and its effect on the brain, and that the Bible actually does have something to say about trauma and how to heal it. Now, if you are a church or a small group leader and you'd like to start applying some of these principles to your small group or congregation, be sure to download my church trauma healing checklist, as well as some of my free other guides and resources that can be found in the links in the description below. Well, that will do it for today. Guys, if you liked this video, hit the like button below, share it with your friends, drop a comment, and let me know how you like this video. And if you have any feedback, I'd be glad to converse with you and share my own thoughts in response to your thoughts and your feedback. And last but not least, hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you'll never miss a video when I upload new content every Wednesday. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.